One of the greatest golden treasures in history. One of the largest, richest, and most beautiful gold treasures in Danish history has been found near the town of Jelling in Denmark. The treasure dates back to the 6th century. An amazing discovery was made by an amateur archaeologist who had recently bought a metal detector and wandered around the fields with it. Moreover, the treasure was found more than 6 months ago, in December last year, but the discovery was made public only now. The hoard weighs a little less than a kilogram and consists of a saucer-sized medallions and Roman coins that have been turned into jewelry. The most important is the heavy gold coin of the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great, 285-337. Some of the items have runic designs and inscriptions that can refer to the kings of that time, as well as to Scandinavian mythology. One of the finds is a bracteate, flat, thin coin with a series of runes and a braided male head. There is also an image of a horse and a bird. In addition, there is a runic inscription on the coin which, according to early interpretation, translates as Supreme. Supreme can refer both to the ruler and, as especially characteristic of later mythological contexts, to be associated with the god Odin. Scientists know that although there was a small city in the area during the migration period, there is no evidence that long before the rise of the Danish kingdom, there lived an unprecedented military leader or a great man who was the owner of these treasures. As experts explained, in the early 500s, some very rich but unknown person decided to bury his treasury, perhaps in the hope of saving it in case of war or as a sacrifice to higher powers. The second version is supported by the fact that at this time the climate in Northern Europe turned upside down after a volcanic explosion in Iceland in 536, and it was for this purpose that most of the treasures of that period were buried. A full pot of oil lamps. The new find surprised archaeologists. It was a pot, common for that time, buried in the ground, similar to those used in Vendanissa in kitchens. Only it was completely new and intact and for some reason filled with oil lamps. The most common and practical option was made from clay. They were produced throughout the empire in huge quantities, and even simple lamps could be decorated with a relief in the center, where the hole for the oil filling was located. These were the lamps the pot was filled with. Archaeologists have counted 22 of them. Inside each lamp was the smallest coin of the Roman Empire. For a few such coins, one could have a mega supper, a soup, and a portion of cheap wine. The minting of the found coins was attributed to 66-67 AD. The vessel and lamps were dated to the same period. The lamps were decorated in different ways. On one there was a flower, on the other a defeated gladiator. Archaeologists also examined a peacock, a lion, the moon goddess Selena, the winged son of the goddess Venus Cupid, and even an erotic scene. In addition to lamps with coins, charred fragments of animal bones were also found in the pot. What does this whole set mean? No one understood. For whoever owned this pot, the set of lamps and coins meant something for sure, but what? We may never know. Ancient chronicles hid the name of the Scorpio King. Before the release of the action-packed historical thriller The Mummy Returns in 2001, only Egyptologists and fans of William Golding's books knew about the existence of such a historical character as the King of Scorpio. At the same time, the personality of this pharaoh was presented in such a way that he looked more like some kind of fictional mystical creature than the real ruler of the Egyptian state. The fact that in the history of Egypt there was a pharaoh named Scorpio, Egyptologists learned at the end of the 19th century. Then, during archaeological excavations in the Hierarchan Palace, a very ancient tomb was discovered. It was also plundered. Scientists nevertheless found a number of objects that were quite valuable from an archaeological point of view. Jewelry, ceramics, a fragment of the ruler's mace. Most of these finds bore the name Scorpion. Thus, a new ruler, Scorpio, was included in the pantheon of Egyptian pharaohs, and for a whole century Sanxingdui, he single-handedly bore the name of a poisonous arthropod inhabitant of the desert. Until 1988, when Egyptologists had to slightly correct the list of the rulers of Egypt. In these lists, the first rulers of Egypt, Menetho, as befits an Egyptian priest, designated the gods Hebe, Mut, Osiris, Ptah, Ra, Set, Thoth, Horus, and Shu. Ordinary mortals followed immediately, the first of which was the pharaoh Menes, and the last were the pharaohs of the Xerxes dynasty who ruled before the Ptolemies. However, in this royal list, there was no mention of either Scorpio or other kings of ancient Egypt. All this confusion lasted until the Egyptologists sat down thoroughly to study the history of the rulers of Egypt, and they did not find that between the gods and the real Egyptian pharaoh Menes, in fact, there was a whole galaxy of previously unknown kings. In order to somehow streamline this moment, historians called all the rulers of this era the pharaohs of pre-dynastic Egypt, or the kings of the OO dynasty. It was among these pharaohs that both Scorpions were who ruled Egypt in the 4th millennium BC, more than 100 years apart. Thus, no one knew about the existence of Pharaoh Scorpio I for several thousand years, despite the fact that this ruler in one is truly the first pharaoh in the history of Egypt. Mystical Pyramid. Excavations were carried out in the Atacama Desert in 2003 by a French explorer. He was intrigued by the nearby geoglyphs and strange mummies that look a lot like aliens. This expedition lasted almost 2 years, and finally the researchers were lucky. At a depth of 4.5 meters in the north of the Atacama, a strange pyramid crystal about 12 centimeters high was found. This artifact was a pyramid with the correct proportions, made of some kind of bluish transparent material. The find was immediately dubbed a sensation because something like that had not been found before. Experts have established the age of this artifact, 3.5 billion years. The crystal is the oldest find in the history of archaeology. When it became known about the age of the pyramid, a real hunt for the scientists began. He survived 4 assassination attempts, after which he left the country for Chile. The Frenchman really wanted to continue his search in the hope of finding something else, but 4 months later, the archaeologists died of poisoning. The fate of the artifact was unknown for a long time. In 2019, among the declassified documents from the famous Area 51 in the United States, experts found an inaccurate description of this artifact, its age, while the location of the find was not indicated. Since then, information has appeared that it was the Americans who, having poisoned the archaeologists, took possession of the pyramid. A collection of treasures in the oldest capital of China. Back in the 1920s, the ruins of the city of Sanxingdui, which was the first capital of the ancient kingdom of Shu, were discovered there. Excavations have been going on since 1986, when archaeologists discovered 2 sacrificial pits filled with treasures. Last year, the most ambitious excavations were carried out. About a dozen sacrificial pits with 1,500 artifacts were found. And now archaeologists have announced that they have been able to excavate 6 more previously unknown sacrificial pits. They found about 500 fully and fragmentarily preserved relics of great historical and material value. Suffice it to say that most of the finds are exquisite gold masks, jade and ivory items, and bronze artifacts. Taking into account last year's findings, the Sanxingdui treasury has been replenished with more than 2,000 items. Among them, for example, there is a unique sacred tree made of bronze. In general, for the entire period of excavations in the ancient capital of the First Kingdom in China, about 10,000 cultural relics were found, the age of which is from 3,000 to 5,000 years. It is believed that the kingdom of Shu itself arose about 5,000 years ago. Archaeologists report that during the recent work, very rare and valuable large bronze vessels were discovered, some of which, after examination, are likely to receive the status of national treasures. The fact is that some of these bronze items have a unique shape, which researchers have never seen before. Numerous pieces of ivory and jade are no less exciting finds. A significant part of them were in only one sacrificial pit. It is noteworthy that there were no bronze items in this pit, which indicates some special traditions that existed during the reign of Shu. Burial of the Bronze Age on a golf course. British archaeologists have discovered a coffin containing human remains and a stone axe with a wooden handle in a pond on a golf course in the east of England. Scientists have established that the rare find, which has survived thanks to silt, is about 4,000 years. Apparently, the burial belonged to a person who held a high position in the local society. The early Bronze Age of Britain is usually dated from 2500 to 1200 BC. Over the millennium, bronze gradually replaced stone as the main material from which weapons and tools were made. During this period, the tradition of bell-shaped beakers turned out to be the main archaeological culture widespread in Britain. Burials of this era are inhumations. As a rule, people were buried one by one in graves under mounds. Bell-shaped goblets were often used as burial items, which is most likely associated with the arrival of migrants from Central Europe to Britain. Archaeologists told about the discovery of a rare coffin of the early Bronze Age, hollowed out of an oak trunk, which had previously been split into two halves. It contained the remains of a man whose grave goods consisted of an axe. The lid of a coffin has not survived. Scientists suggest that the burial was made around 2000 BC. The coffin turned out to be about 3 meters long and 1 meter wide. Inside, it was lined with plants, in particular yew and juniper leaves. After he was placed in the grave, a gravel mound was poured over it, which was mainly due to people with high status in society. This find was made by accident while working in a pond at a golf course, which is located in Lincolnshire. Discovered the real relics of St. Peter. A sensational find was made by a worker in the Roman church of Santa Maria in Capella. During the restoration work under a stone slab at the altar, he discovered 2 ancient clay jugs with the names of the first popes, Peter, Felix, Callistus, and Cornelius. And as you know, the Apostle Peter was the first Roman bishop, that is, the first pope of Rome. For the past 35 years, this church has been closed due to its dilapidated state. Finally, in 2021, restoration work began in it. When one of the workers lifted a stone slab next to the ancient altar, he saw a cache. It contained dilapidated clay jugs, on the lids of which the names of the first popes were written. The fact that the remains of the first saints are kept in the church of Santa Maria in Capella has been known for a long time. However, who exactly was not known. Also, the sources say that it is here that the tunic of the Mother of God is kept, but so far it's considered a lost relic. The found remains were transferred to the Vatican, but there was no official statement that these were the relics of St. Peter. The rector of the church, Father Massimiliano Floridi, believes that until an examination is made, it is not worth saying that these are definitely the relics of St. Peter. But the most interesting thing is that in the 1960s, under the Basilica of St. Peter on the Vatican Hill, a tombstone was found with an inscription in Greek, Patros Anni, Peter is here. In the tomb was found the body of a man about 60 years old who lived according to research in the 1st century AD. He was dressed in rich robes embroidered with gold, but his head was missing. And in 1968, Paul VI officially recognized them with the relics of Saint the Apostle Peter. And here they are. Scientists are sure that the find in the church of Santa Maria in Capella is precisely the real relics of the Apostle Peter. The point in this unusual discussion perhaps will put a comparative genetic analysis. After all, it may happen that the results will coincide or not. Time will show. Mysterious 12-meter wreck. According to experts, the mysterious 12-meter wrecked ship found on a Latvian beach is about 200 years old, and it may well be the remains of a lost warship of the British Royal Navy. Part of the wreck was found by local residents on the Daugava River beach, which is located just a few kilometers from Riga, the capital of Latvia. However, the true scale of the discovery remained hidden until heavy equipment in the form of excavators appeared on the beach, which were able to dig up a much larger part of the wreckage, 12 meters long and 4 meters wide. While the ship's origin remained to be seen, there was evidence that its hull was once plated with copper, a technology first developed for the British Royal Navy. The ship's age is also unknown, but it is made from oak, which was a popular material for shipbuilding in Britain until the mid-1800s, leading Latvian experts to speculate that it could be between 150 and 200 years old. For the construction of the ship, one ship of the line, timber was required from about 4,000 mature oak trees. To expose the remains of the mysterious oak and copper ship, excavators had to remove a massive 10x4 layer of sand. The copper plates that protected against ship worms and the corrosive effects of salt water have long been removed, but images of the remains show that the ship's wooden beams surprisingly well preserved. The wreck has recently been declared a cultural monument, allowing further research into its origins. The ship will also be surveyed using GPR, which should help reveal its true scale. Dog-headed people from ancient icons. To better understand the shock of the educated aesthetes of the ancient times, it is worthy noting that it was a rather small and close world. Traveling took a lot of time, vast territories remained unknown, and everything new was very difficult to squeeze into the usual system of values. Ancient Greece and Rome are advanced civilizations. At the same time, not far from them, for example in equatorial Africa, life came to a standstill at the stage of primitive tribes. Needless to say how different the inhabitants of those primitive settlements were from the Europeans. And although black slaves in antiquity were in abundance, people of similar nature with a more expressive appearance could be perceived cardinally. True, this does not explain in any way where the stable image of a dog-headed man came from the Indian, Persian, and even Chinese chronicles. The latter have few connections with the European continent and developed authentically, because the distance to them was enormous. Alexander the Great, who walked half the world in military campaigns, greatly expanded the horizon of the ancient world. An Indian miniature titled "The Troops of Alexander the Great Are Fighting the Dog-Headed" presents such an episode as part of the story as if this could even happen in reality. Although in this image, the creatures with the supposedly dog heads look more like primates, armed, but it is not clear by someone or on their own. Akrakas and Ogani are Coptic saints with a dog's head. This is a Coptic icon of the 18th century, and on it, in the glow of a halo, those very dog-headed people figures from the depth of collective memory appear. According to legend, Akrakan and Ogani were followers of the Coptic Saint Mercury Abisiphon and served him so faithfully that they earned a place in iconography. Skeptics consider such images to be an echo of a pagan cult or a reference to Anubis, one of the main gods of the ancient Egyptian pantheon. It was he who was depicted with the body of a man and the head of the dog. And in order to learn more about the ancient worlds in our history, I strongly recommend that you subscribe to the channel and click on the bell. I will definitely answer every kind comment. Thanks for your views. Bye everyone!